our live stream, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth workshop in our virtual ministry fair series, Servants of the Spirit, Gifts for Ministry. This morning, we have Workshop for Wardens. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Ms. Ada Ramirez for providing Spanish translation for today's session. Please be sure to click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select English or Spanish. This session is being live streamed on the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel, and the recording will remain available for viewing on demand. A link to that video, along with the resources presented, will also be available on the convention website. We are joined this morning by Steve Yeazell and Bishop Catherine Roskam to talk about the critical relationships a senior warden has with the rector, vestry, congregation, and diocese at large. At this time, I ask everyone to mute yourselves. Anytime you have a question or comment, please put them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go, and we will also be doing a general Q&A following the presentation at the end. So now I turn it to you, Bishop Catherine.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all here today. I'm going to start. I would like to start so that this is, sort of like a teaching Eucharist. I would like to lead the opening the way I would do it in working with a vestry. And so I'm going to be talking about what I'm doing besides doing what I'm doing. So to start off, I want to start with scripture because I think the place of prayer is not in a vestry meeting is not only to worship God, but to orient us to God. And the best way to do that is, in my opinion, is to start with a bit of scripture. Not a huge amount, but I'm going to start today with the scripture upon which the name of this series is based, and that is 1 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning at the 4th verse. Now, if I were in a vestry meeting, over time, other people would read the lesson. It would not be, I would not be doing everything that I'm doing necessarily right now, but I would invite somebody else to read the lesson. But here it is. Now, there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another, faith by the same Spirit. To another, gifts of healing by the one Spirit. To another, the working of miracles. To another, prophecy. To another, discernment of spirits. To another, various kinds of tongues. To another, the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each one individually, just as the Spirit chooses. We have now gotten back to a much more collaborative sense of collaborative clergy and lay leadership. But I think that what that scripture shows is that we've gotten back to the beginning, because that's the kind of ministry to which we've all been called, to recognize the gifts that other people have. So I would also like to use a prayer from the prayer book. And I really recommend this. I know this sounds a little odd, but people are less and less familiar with the prayer book because of the bulletins that include everything that we commonly use, particularly for the ease of newcomers. But there are many riches in the prayer book outside of our Eucharist and daily office that we might say together in a church space. And so to use those prayers is not only appropriate to the task of the day, but it also enriches people's use and understanding of the Book of Common Prayer, which is in fact the determinative thing that is as it is at the heart of our identity, as opposed to other denominations that have more doctrinal and dogmatic definitions. So we are to pray together, and this is a wonderful resource. And today, I want to first ask God's blessing on our work today, on the relationships that we build within church leadership, both lay and ordained, and especially this morning on the gift of the relationship between a priest and warden. And I hope, dear Lord, that everything we say and do will be in accordance with your will, but will also serve the mission of your mission for our churches as we move forward. And now, from the prayer book, the prayer for guidance. Direct us, O Lord, in all our doings with your most gracious favor, and further us with your continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify your holy name, and finally, by your mercy, obtain everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen. And now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague and friend, and once Senior Warden.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much, Bishop Catherine, from the other side of the country, as you are, not far from the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Let me begin by, this is Bishop Roskam's suggestion, by describing how reluctant a senior warden was I. I didn't quite have to be kidnapped, but it was pretty close to that. And rather than just making fun of myself, there's a point I want to make. I didn't think when I was asked the first time and even the second time, I didn't think I had the sort of rich network of connections within the parish as a whole, what sociologists might call social capital, to do the job well. I really didn't. I crept back and forth to the early service and scuttled out as soon as it was over. And I didn't know well the parish as a whole, and I thought therefore I really couldn't do it properly. I don't know if I did it properly, but I did it. And let me share with you a second thing. Not only did it immensely enrich my connections with the parish as a whole, but in many ways it deepened my faith. I came to think of the parish as an extended family, the part of the communion of saints. And so it was, for those of you who are, I suspect with some trepidation, approaching a wardenship for the first time, let me offer that bit of encouragement. It's a lot of work involved, but it can also be work that is enriching. I recently had a conversation with my successor as warden, whose successor Arnold Blanchard is about to be, and was asking her about her experience. And she said something just wonderful. She said, not only had it been a joy, she really unexpectedly enjoyed herself, but it had also deepened her faith. So among other things, I think it's possible to think of the wardenship as an opportunity for spiritual growth. It's not only that, but it can be that. Bishop Roskam, does that sound right to you?
It does sound right to me, because it's a call. Becoming a warden, it's a call, and it becomes a holy thing, a sacred obligation. And so you walk that path, and your spiritual life grows. I mean, it just does. And God always has surprises for all of us.
It certainly was for me.
Yeah, as we say yes to whatever seems that our call is. But I also want to say that, call does come from community, as well as we're a very individual society. but it does come to us. Our personal call comes. I've experienced that. And so that is true. But our call, we can't lose sight of the fact that our call also comes from community. So there may be others of you who are elected, but the call is there. And also, the call is different at different times in the life of a parish. And it allows for all kinds of gifts and spiritual gifts and differences in personality and all of that to be used at different times in the history of the church. So it's not that there's only one kind that's called forever, but each of you who is a senior warden now, you've been called. You've been called to this office. You've been called to this holy office. And as is with God at the center of all we do, we find the miracles, and we find the hope, and we find the strength. Because, it reminds me of the hymn about for the facing of this hour.
Mhm.
I think all of us who are called into active ministry in these times, it's a special call, and I think carries with it difficulties that are presented by our present culture in ways that we didn't have 10 years ago. I mean, we never thought we'd have to face the kind of divisions that are in our culture and sometimes within our churches, because of current cultural trends. So, and you've been called into that, and it's hard sometimes to be grateful when we're called in such difficult times. But it's a blessing. It'll be a blessing if we continue to be led by God.
That's a segue into two things. First of all, as I've suggested in the little outline I sent to you folks earlier, what we want to focus on this morning, and what I deeply believe in, is this is all about relationships, and it's about relationships with shared ministries. Once upon a time, maybe churches had the resources to be 4 and 5 deep in clergy and staff and various people. That's a vanishingly small number of parishes in the Episcopal Church. What that means for all of us, and especially for you lay leaders, is that lay leadership is absolutely critical. It isn't mother or father knows best and we fall in line. It has to be a substantial part of lay leadership, and that means collaborative leadership. It means it's about nurturing relationships, and you'll hear me say that till you probably get tired of it, but it's true. It's true. And that means that the warden, if you want to think of yourself about this as like this, the warden is a relationship manager. The warden and the rector, but the warden has to be thinking about a whole set of relationships that she or he is managing. Now, fortunately, you are not alone. You may know about this already, but if you don't, let me show you. I'm going to share a screen with you here. So this is a publication of the I think it's the Episcopal Church Foundation, or maybe it's Forward
Yes.
Day. I think it is.
Forward Movement prints it now, but it's created by the Episcopal Church Foundation.
In any case, it is a book. It's available online. I'm giving you I've just used the link, but it's a book. It's, in my view, very well done. If you're not already familiar with it, I highly commend it to you, and commend it not only to you, but to your vestry. At various points, we'll talk about this, but at various points, Bishop Catherine and I would assign to a pair of vestry members a chapter in this book, and to spend 10 minutes at the early part of the meeting after worship, sort of talking about that chapter and what its implications might mean for the our particular parish. I think it's well written. There's a lot of information, but it's information presented in, I think, a useful way, and it's got a bunch of additional resources in it. So it has my highest recommendation, and it's as a way of saying you're not completely alone. So let me.
Yes, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's the most useful vestry resource I've ever used in a parish. And I do like that we at St. James has a large vestry, so it really worked very well to go into a book that has this much depth and richness to it, to have people share the pieces of it, and because otherwise it can be very daunting. I mean, people have jobs and all that kind of thing, and it's not that all the vestry should read all of it, but it means that some people will go really in depth and help the rest of the vestry with a particular aspect of what they are teaching. And what I really love and was so glad to see about it is that it doesn't treat the ultimate authority of the rector and the warden as silos. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
It's not like, oh, well, the vestry is in charge of the fiscal stuff, so that's what we do. Well, everything, and the bishop, sorry about that little slip, but the priest is responsible for the worship and the liturgy, and that's what he or she is supposed to do. No, that means the different groups have different responsibilities and authority, ultimate authority in those areas. But all of the church life are things that we do together. We do them together, and that's the way it's meant to be. And then the vestry does get the final say on fiscal matters, and the rector or vicar gets final say on what goes on church on Sunday. But that doesn't mean we develop it in different silos and no touching the other silo, which is it. I must say that when I was first consecrated a bishop and went around to different parishes, that was actually the way it was. And it's not, it's an impoverished way of looking at our ministry, which is meant to be collaborative and communal. So I'm delighted to see this resource and know that more people are working in a different kind of way in collaboration.
Well, this is a complete segue into the next point I want to make. First of all, I want to talk, there are, I think, 5 critical relationships that you'll be managing as a warden together with your rector. One is with the rector. Second is with the vestry. Third is with the parish as a whole. Then if there are ancillaries, if there's a school, there's an old age home, whatever. And then with the diocese. Now, we'll have time, I think, only for the first 2 at the most. So we're going to talk about relating to the rector, or the rector relating to the warden, and then about relating with the relationship with the vestry. So this is simply echoing what Catherine Roskam has just said, which is the Anglican way is for these to be shared responsibilities, not silos, to pick up her term. On the other hand, there are primary responsibilities. And maybe Bishop Roskam, you could just quickly go through the rector's primary responsibilities.
I need to start with a footnote, just to say that I am currently now in a diocese that actually doesn't have senior wardens. Mm-hmm. It has wardens. Mm-hmm. And both wardens are chosen by the vestry. In California, you have a senior warden, and the senior warden is chosen by the rector. And that is, we don't need to talk about that, but it's slightly different. And I actually prefer the old model, Although I think we could do without the senior and junior. Some other designation might be better. We were joking about.
You got to remember how old I am, Bishop Catherine. I've got to be senior.
Anyway, I think it's a grace for a rector to be able to choose the senior warden from people who have already been elected by the parish. So it's not someone random, but someone that has the confidence of the parish already. So, yes, worship and liturgy is definitely the purview of the priest. And different priests handle this in different kinds of ways. Some have worship committees. Some have people who have more of a background, may not be ordained, but have a background in liturgy to hold some special function within the church, like MC at services or verger. And so, but I also think I got to preach a little here. I can't help it. I got to preach a little. But I also think that when a priest goes into a parish, they have to honor the style of the worship within the parish. And that doesn't mean that you do things exactly the same way. And sometimes there are things that actually ought not to be done. If a parish has been without a priest for a long time, sometimes things develop that need to be sort of pulled back into line just a little bit in terms of the meaning of the Eucharist and how it moves or how we do the daily office or whatever. But there are styles of worship, very broad styles within the Episcopal Church. And I've heard such horror stories about very high church people going into kind of a more evangelical church and trying to turn it into an Anglo-Catholic parish. And what happens is it splits the parish. You lose a tremendous number of people. And it makes an idol out of worship style. And I don't think it should be. I think we come into parishes to serve the people and to work with the manner of worship that they are most at home with. But we also have to make choices having to do with the reading of scripture and, what using authorized texts or not. And if we're not using authorized texts, to have permission from the bishop. Because common prayer is so important to our identity as Anglicans, we have to do liturgy, not only do it in community, but alter it in community. And we can't go off on the things that we might like individually. We need to do it within the very wide-reaching, broad reach of the Episcopal Church that allows so many different styles of worship. But we have to have it recognizably Anglican. And as a friend of mine said, if the sign outside says it's an Episcopal Anglican church, then we can't tell a lie with that. It's got to mean that our worship is essentially and authoritatively Episcopal, this part of the Anglican Church. And I can't stress that enough, because sometimes people coming into the priesthood from other denominations don't put enough emphasis on the importance of the commonality of our worship and the communal aspect of our church. It's one of the things I love about this church, is that we do things as a church, and we don't do it in a top-down way. We do it from the ground up. Now, we might forget that when we want to change the liturgy in a certain kind of way that we personally like, but comes from some odd place, and is not authorized. You can actually go to a bishop and get authorization for trial worship and all of that. But again, it's got to be within our common, with the understanding that it has to be a part of our common prayer. So we do alter the prayer book from time to time, and everybody is involved in that, laity and clergy alike. But once it's changed in a kind of way and authorized, then it's up to us to be faithful in using it.
Well, that gets me to my segue. If the rector's primary responsibility are worship and liturgy, pastoral care, managing the church staff, Christian education, maintaining the parish register, the warden and vestry's primary responsibilities, and this relates directly to what you said about the new rector who wants to turn everything over liturgically. The primary responsibility, a primary responsibility, is calling a rector. And one hopes that as part of that search process, there might be some discussion about worship styles. And so, if you will, that the situation you described suggests to me a flaw somewhere in the search process. I mean, we don't want to go into that now, but that's part of the story.
Yeah. It didn't happen so much anymore, but I've been ordained a long time. And so as you have been active in the church a long time and we remember other kinds of ways of doing things. And I think we've progressed a lot as a church as a whole from there. I do want to say a word about pastoral care.
Yeah.
And which I absolutely, and I need to say that Steve Yeazell is a wonderful lay Eucharistic minister. And I so believe that pastoral care is the work of all the people of the whole congregation, and not just, there's certain pastoral things that a priest must do. And also, it depends on the size of the parish. A smaller parish, a priest has more direct relationship with all the individuals in a parish. As parishes are larger, it's not possible to be in all those places at the same time. And so it works better with lay pastoral care. But actually, even the smallest parishes, they might not have it organized, but it's when somebody's in a car accident, the casseroles appear on the front porch, and lay people pray with those who need prayers. It's not just clergy. And I just think that is something that we all do together, according to our abilities and our strengths and our compassion and our time. So anyway,
fair enough.
I'm trying to go down that list, Steve. I'm trying to
Okay.
look at this, because I get carried away. I know this, but I don't have, in terms of managing church staff, I think that very often there are lay people who do that. And Christian education does not have to be taught by clergy. Laity can, most Christian education programs are led by laity, but sometimes if there's multi-clergy staff, one of the other clergy might take that on. And the thing is, it's really important to stay in communication. I'm probably jumping ahead, but even if we have to say it again later, it is so important to stay in communication with the people with whom you work. We would have meetings of the wardens when I was at St. James, and even when we, quote, didn't have anything in particular, because once we got in a room, we realized there were things to address. They weren't on a to-do list, but, just a checking in is really important. And it's important to check in with staff. Part of what the priest in charge does is to have staff meetings. I'm a firm believer in staff meetings where both the clergy staff and the lay staff meet together, because it's a shared mission. And we have different gifts, just as St. Paul says, but we're all part of God's mission. And so these ministries are all opportunities for us to work together to strengthen God's mission in the world.
So let me come back just quickly to the kind of primary responsibilities of the warden and the vestry. Was calling the rector is one. The other obvious one, but worth mentioning, is exercising fiduciary oversight. You've got to maintain the property of the church and the campus. You've got to manage risk, including making sure that there's adequate insurance coverage. And of course, you've got a budget. The other, and this relates to another point that relates to what Bishop Roskam just said, you really have to communicate and reach out to the parish community. Now, that is not only the warden's and vestry responsibility, but it is very important. You cannot take it for granted that because you post the vestry minutes somewhere on your church website that everybody, indeed, perhaps anybody, has any idea what you're doing. You have to communicate often and in multiple ways. You can't just say it once. The number of times, I'm sure Bishop Roskam can attest to this, that we've put something in the bulletin and then made an announcement, and then some decision gets made, and people rush up to you and say, "Why doesn't anyone ever tell me anything?" Well, that's right. We thought we told you, but the real message is you have to tell people again and again and again in multiple ways, in person, in print, on digitally. It's got to be done, and that is part of the responsibility, not solely, but the warden and the vestry. Another thing, and this was not obvious to me when I became a warden, so many things weren't, it is the responsibility both of the warden and the vestry to nurture people's spiritual lives. That doesn't mean that you are replacing the rector or the ordained, but it is not something that you leave entirely to the clergy. It is a joint responsibility to nurture each other's spiritual life, your own, but also those of your vestry members. And then finally, this came as a little bit of a surprise to me, but officially it is the vestry that recommends candidates for holy orders after an appropriate process of discernment. It is not that the bishop or the priest sends somebody out to become ordained. It is partly part of the responsibility of the vestry and the warden. So we've talked a little bit about primary responsibilities for both sides. Let's talk a little bit about shared responsibilities. One that's super important is to discern and periodically to revise the parish mission or understandings of the parish mission. Parishes do not stand still, and the way it was in the good old rectorship of Father Glitch is probably not exactly the way it is now. Even though the personnel hasn't changed that much, the world has changed, and you need to think about discerning and revising. Another critical shared responsibility is to recruit and renew parish leadership from the first day of wardenship or of rectorship. You need to be scanning the horizon for new potential leaders, potential vestry members, but not just vestry members, potential youth group or Christian education or lay ministry. You need to be looking for people who would be good at that and bringing them into the fold. People want to be asked to do things, but you have to ask them. You
have to ask them. If I could just add to that, putting a notice in the bulletin that you're looking for such and such, it doesn't work because it's not personal. But when you ask someone that you think would be good at something, they recognize that. And that's why it's so important to really invite people.
And it's not just that it's impersonal, but especially in a culturally diverse parish, or not even a culturally diverse, people don't want to be seen as putting themselves forward, saying, "Oh, me." But if you ask them, you'll be astonished at the response you'll get, and it's a critical part shared ministry. It's not just vestry and not just clergy. Obviously, you've got to do governance, making sure that the vestry gets reelected and that the various things get done and the budget gets done. But finally, a shared responsibility, and here I'm going to ask Catherine Roskam, Bishop Roskam, to speak to this. A difficult, not difficult, but an important part of shared responsibility is mutual ministry review. Can you say a few words about that, Bishop Catherine?
I would love to say it, because I think that there are a lot of people on vestries who work in the corporate area. And so choosing a priest is like, like having a headhunter, and you then find the one that's the right for you, and then you hire them, and then you review them from time to time. Au contraire, I'm terribly sorry, but that's just not the way it works in the church. Priests are not hired. We are called. We are called to be into the midst of a congregation, to be the spiritual leader, the Eucharistic person, in both literal and metaphoric ways. And so it isn't that we are not, all of us, held accountable for what we may do in any position, but we do this together. We do this together with our vestry, because we together are the leadership of a congregation. And so we have, Bishop Diane's going to have to help me with this, because I don't think you call it, do you call it mutual ministry review? I think you have you do. Okay. So it's really, really important to have mutual ministry review. I would say once a year. Don't let it go by, because, if you were in business, you would review your goals every year, probably more often than that. And that's the one part of it that we can take from that other context. But we come together and we look at what we've done in the past year and really focus on what's working well. This is not to hunt for the things that were going wrong and feeling terrible about it. Maybe we didn't have time to get to it. Maybe something else happened, as things have happened in the culture now, that made our efforts go in a different direction. That's all fine. But we look at it together. We look at our goals. We make goals in the beginning. We make goals for the coming year within the context of what we have come to discern as the mission for our particular parish. And then in a year, we review the goals and we see where we did really well. And if we want to continue with those things we're doing really well, or were they discrete amount of time, now they're done and we can go on to other things. And then we have to look at what we'd like to improve. And that's better than thinking about it, where did we fail? I don't believe in failure. I don't. There's success and there's learning experience. And what we have in the past felt were our failures turn out to be really instructive for the future. So we want to look on it in a creative and constructive way to say, okay, this didn't go as we had planned. Now, is this something that we want to continue? Did it not go well because we bit off too much and maybe we'll have to do it in the future? Are we being called in a different direction? I mean, there are all kinds of answers to those questions, but you discern them together as a group in a mediated, facilitated conversation with the help of someone from the diocese. And it really, there was a study in Harvard where they asked a group of graduates what their goals were for the future for 5 and 10 years. And then there was another group that they said, we would like you to write down your goals for the next 5 years and also for the 10 years. And then it was a longitudinal study. They checked back, and the ones that had written down their goals had achieved a higher percentage of what they had aimed for than the ones who knew what their goals were, but didn't really focus and write it down the thing about writing down a goal is you can refer to it from time to time. You can have a vestry meeting and saying, how are we doing with our goals right now? Even though it's not the mutual ministry review, do we have to, we're aware of it more. And so I really want to encourage you to do that if you're not. I think people are afraid of evaluation because they think there's a, it's Santa Claus, making a list about who's naughty and nice. And it isn't that at all. It's a growth experience. Now, if there are problems within relationships, that's a different thing that might take a different kind of mediating. But for the most part, it doesn't happen when everything's on the table. I want to say everything needs to be on the table. I don't think, and I need to say a couple of things about this. There should not be a hidden agendas. Everybody should be working on the same agenda. That's the way it's most likely to get done anyway, the second thing is you need to know what it is. When you're on the vestry, whether you're a warden, but especially wardens, you need to know how to keep a confidence, because you hold a lot of information that can't actually be public, not because it's a secret. The difference having secrets is holding information for the sake of power. And confidence is when we protect other people's stories, pastoral situations, involvements that we can't talk about. You can't serve on a vestry and be a gossip. It's very destructive to congregational life. So we have to learn how to respect each other in that. And to go back, and then Steve, I'll turn it over, but I really have to say a word about what we talked about. And how many of you work, I can't see everybody all at once, but how many of you know the work of Eric Law and have used his methods?
I'm going to get to that if I can in a minute.
Okay, was that later? I'm jumping there.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll come back to that.
So for any of this to work, you got to know your rector, you got to meet your rector, you got to support your rector. Knowing the rector you got to set aside time, and I think it has to be regular time. Ideally, it would be face-to-face, so you can, but next best is probably Zoom or something like similar. How does he view his or her ministry? What are her plans, hopes, fears? And then a little bit, not deeply personal, but what are his pursuits, interests, family responsibilities that may bear on other things? So meet regularly, meet in person when and if it becomes possible. And you don't need to have a formal agenda, as Bishop Roskam has already said, but notes are important. You got to write down, especially if there's a to-do, that it gets done and that you have some responsibility. One knows, is it the rector who's going to do this? Is it the warden who's going to do this? Is it somebody else? And if so, how's it going to get communicated? Supporting the rector. So I've had two different, both Bishop Roskam and another rector tell me it's really critically important, and I'm going to quote, always tell the truth to your rector, even if that truth isn't particularly happy. And that goes together with what I call the never blindsided principle. It should never happen that a group of parishioners are deeply unhappy about something and you don't tell the rector about this. She may not, or he may not think it should be changed, but he sure needs to know about it. So meet. After you meet or as you meet, figure out who's responsible for what. Schedule time for mutual review of ministry, and by the way, for the compensation process, which isn't the same thing, but don't just ignore that. At some point, on some regular interval, and probably Bishop Bruce can give you better guidance than I could, there ought to be review of compensation so that it fits with the growing seniority, that it meets diocesan guidelines, and so on. Communicate regularly, clearly, and repeatedly. We've said this already. Once is never enough. There are multiple opportunities, multiple platforms, and you got to use them all, especially for anything that's remotely important, any critical turn in the parish. There's got to be formal communication in bulletins, newsletter, online. There's got to be informal communication. But here, let me make one caution. It's easy in a coffee hour conversation to either unintentionally to convey confidential information, or just as bad, to create a sense of insiders and outsiders. Well, Bishop Roskam thinks this, but X doesn't agree. It's got to be, you've got to be conscious that you're speaking, even though you're speaking just to one individual, it's got to be something you're willing to share much more broadly. It's super important. It's wildly destructive to the parish and to relationships if you're communicating not even confidential information, but sort of insider-outsider information. So informal conversations are fine, but not when they cross that line, okay?
Yeah, you talk from your own, you can always speak from your own perspective.
Yeah.
You can say what you said at a meeting.
Yeah, that's right, but not what someone else said, absolutely. So let us move to the next relationship relating to the vestry. Samantha suggested that maybe we pause briefly if there are questions about the rector-warden relationship. So we pause at least briefly to let people chime in here.
Have we gotten anything in the chat?
I haven't seen anything, but maybe there is something.
No, nothing in the chat yet.
Okay.
If you do have questions or comments, please do put those in the chat. I think this is a great time to pause and answer some questions.
I see one hand, Kimberly Shugart, I think it is.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. You mentioned the mutual ministry review. Who would we contact at the diocese to get that underway or set up?
Tom Discavage, Kihada Discavage at the diocese can help you set that up.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and is there anything else? No, I'm not seeing anything, but if there is, don't be shy. So relating to the vestry, so let's assume that we've got the relationship with the rector going okay. Has to be continually nurtured by both sides. There's this wonderful phrase, so now comes the vestry relationship. There's this wonderful phrase in the vestry resource guide, which is the leader, quote, leader as host, not hero. And I thought that was absolutely wonderful. You are maybe convening the meeting, but you are not, quote, running it. Anyway, so that's.
I think that I think from the priest standpoint, it's not a good idea in most circumstances. There might be some where it's important, but to give your opinion first, because often with lay people, it carries so much weight that they're not going to be able to really explore a question in a way that they might have if they hadn't heard your opinion first. It is the practice here in the Diocese of New York that when we do visitations, we meet with the vestry without the priest. And we only do this in parishes that are not divided. I mean, if there's a problem, we don't do it. We deal with that in a different kind of way. But they've gotten used to the idea that they can come in a little later, but we really want to talk with the lay people because they're going to say things about the priest that are very helpful. Like, we're a little worried about her. She's not taking her day off. And, but he's been so wonderful in doing this and that, it in a happy, healthy parish, we always take about 15 minutes to just meet with the laity first, just to hear them and weigh in on things that they would defer to their priest, because especially in a happy parish, they are more apt to defer to the priest than not, So in running vestry meetings, it's a really important thing not to weigh in too early as clergy, and to understand that eventually when we get to the point where we might want to weigh in, that depending on what the topic is, we're one voice of many, and it's collaborative discernment.
Which miraculously brings me to the next topic on my outline. How could this happen?
How could this happen, Steve?
Yeah. One of the critically important pieces of the relationship with the vestry that I came, under Bishop Roskam's guidance, to appreciate is the orientation of new and old members. And Bishop Roskam, I'd like to say a couple of words about this, but let me just set this up. Sure. The way I came to experience it was that after with each new election of a new vestry class, so to speak, there would be a retreat, usually a Saturday morning, but several hours, not a quickie and not a 2-day thing. I guess, although if you could afford it and arrange, people could do it, it would be okay. But a retreat sometime apart with just the vestry, and at which point the major points are the setting of norms in relationship to worship, in relationship to respect, and in relationship to listening. And I wonder, you've already mentioned Canon Law, Eric Law, Bishop Roskam, but I wonder if you could say a few words both about the worship, the respect, and the listening, because I found that unbelievably important.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the concept of invitation, which is, it's very, very powerful. And Eric Law has, a lot of people in the Diocese of LA really know his work, but I gather from the hands, not everybody does. I urge you, if his seminal work is The Wolf Shall Dwell with the Lamb, and if you haven't read it, you really need to read it. And it has the very basics. He's written many books, and they all have wonderful tools on various occasions, and they're useful ways of thinking about a whole bunch of things that I also recommend. But if you don't do anything else, read The Wolf Shall Dwell with the Lamb, because it gives such insight into the difference in not only in communication styles, which really affect a conversation that we have all together. And I will just talk about the tools, but
they wanted, there's a chat. Yeah, okay. It's The Wolf Shall Dwell with the Lamb. Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
The Wolf Shall Dwell with the Lamb. And it really talks about characteristics of different ethnicities that are not in a stereotypical kind of way, but in a cultural kind of way of how we are formed by our cultures to lead us to communicate in very different ways, in ways that to other cultures are unacceptable. And that goes for everything. And there is no right or wrong, that we just have to recognize, are we a wolf or are we a lamb? And we have to adjust our but it doesn't take us alone adjusting our invitational style. And this is the tool that I have used since, let me see, it's 30 years. It's 1991 I started using this. And the thing is, there are differences in communication styles beyond ethnic. It can be personality. There are introverts, there are extroverts. There are some who are very loquacious, like I am. But
so maybe you can describe the mutual invitation technique.
I told Steve to ring me in, but yes. And what it is, it's the facilitator shares the question. I did not do this for everything that we did in Vestry, but if we had something to discuss that was important, that might even be touchy or might be scary, or something that really needed an in-depth sharing from everyone, instead of sitting at the front of the room and calling on people, what I did was invite, not call on. It's a series of invitations, and I would invite someone to weigh in on the subject. Now, I would also, the leader, and it doesn't necessarily have to start with the priest, but whoever starts, gives the time frame and encourages everybody to be cognizant of the time so that everyone has time to share. We don't use one of those little sand things. People need to take responsibility for how they work in a group. So, and the person that I would invite, the first person to be invited, would then share. If they didn't want to share, they could pass, but they did not pass the ability to invite the next person. They, even though they passed, would invite the next person to speak. And the rule is that nobody gets interrupted, there's no crosstalk, and that we really go to a place of deep listening one to another.
And let me just do a quick testimonial for this, if I may. I'm used to faculty meetings where, not shy people. It is astonishingly effective, and it's particularly effective with those people who, either for culture or gender or just personal characteristics, might, unlike me, not be waving my hand in the air. We got astonishingly thoughtful, heartfelt, reflective contributions. People didn't feel pressured. They could say, I'd like to pass now. I so commend it to your attention that I'm interrupting, which I shouldn't be doing if we were doing.
That's okay. No, it's absolutely a game changer. Because look, in reality, if you've been working in a vestry without this, you can give me the names of the people who are going to talk first, right?
All right.
That's just the way it is. And with this, there's so many surprises. And usually the person
I'm laughing. One of our early meetings between Bishop Catherine and me, this was at a warden rector meeting. This was after a vestry meeting. She turned to me very sweetly and said, "You should have took over that meeting, didn't you?" And she was right. And I didn't do it again.
Oh,
go ahead.
But you did a good job. Anyway, but yeah. And usually in the first go-rounds of this, when people get used to it, in the first go-rounds, the people who used to take over the meetings by talking first and talking too much usually get called on last. But it doesn't last for long. As people learn to respect this, there's some people who, the talkers will usually come to the priest and say, this is terrible. It's very controlling. It's very whatever. And the people who were very quiet in the meetings come and say, thank you very much. It's the first time I've felt listened to. So, we have to step up and step back depending on who we are and at different times. And this method just takes care of it. And the other blessing that comes, well, there are many blessings from it, but it's more likely to give you a more diverse leadership.
Yes. And better decisions.
And better decisions.
I mean, that's not the sole reason to do it, but that process, in my experience, leads to much more thoughtful decisions that are likely to reflect a whole variety of viewpoints, not just the people who speak loudest or most. Absolutely. So that brings me to something else in the vestry meeting. And this, both Bishop Roskam and I've spoken to a couple of other rectors about us getting preparation for this. And it's something that Joanna Sartorius said when St. James was in our search. It is more important to get it right than to get it fast. You cannot rush important decisions, whatever they are. I mean, I'm speaking of a search, but a decision to sell a building or to hire a new assistant, whatever the important decisions that your parish place, take time. Do not rush it. There are relatively few decisions that have to be made by tomorrow or yesterday. And if you rush it, you will not only hurt feelings, but you're much more likely to get it wrong. One person to whom I spoke had a wonderful phrase, who spoke about a holy process. And in your vestry meetings, not to approve the minutes, mind you, but you don't need a holy process for that. A consent calendar will work nicely, thank you. But for anything important, take time, whether through mutual invitation or other, and often that means several meetings on the same topic. It can be frustrating for those who want to slam it through. Again, a priest, a rector, a present rector to whom I spoke about a parishioner in a former parish who came to complain to her and said, we're not businesslike enough. We need to be more businesslike. I'm not so sure that was right, and she certainly wasn't sure that was right. The process is unbelievably important, and take your time. So I'm sorry to jump in with that, but I think it's so important.
Yes, and I want to say also to priests, I know priests who work themselves to death because it's easier for them to do it themselves instead of delegate to someone else who perhaps will not do it as well. And what I want to say to you is, what is it about? Is it about doing something perfectly in the church, or is it about raising up leadership? And that may mean that things may not go so smoothly, but they will be strengthening and empowering ministries by someone actually doing it. And it keeps it also, priests should not be burned out. It's very easy to be burned out. And this way, it isn't that it's for the priest's ease, it's for the building up of the church, as St. Paul says, which we're all involved in. And so it's about that decision about the building up of the church that empowers lay ministry. That means that perhaps the priest might devote some more time to prayer as opposed to whatever has been delegated around, and to really trust people as they do things. And if they don't, then you deal with it. But generally, people who take on things do want to do it and do it well. So have patience and lose the inner perfectionist.
I might add that goes for wardens too. It is not unheard of for wardens individually to think, well, I can do this faster and better than she can, and that might be right, but you're not just burning yourself out, but you're losing the opportunity to create a shared collective leadership. And that is some of the most important work you have. And if you're doing it all yourself, it ain't happening. Not only do people think, well, I'm not going to volunteer because he's going to do it, but you're not going to be raising up leaders for the next generation and for the future. So I want to echo what Bishop Roskam is saying, but point out that it doesn't just apply to priests.
There's a wonderful image in some poetry, and it was set to music, about the pavement, the aisle of the church being the pavement through on which all the pilgrims pass, and that idea that there are people before us, and God willing, there are people after us, and that part of what we do is prepare for the ones who come next. It's like a relay race. I mean, there's a time to pass on the baton. And actually, that's not on our list, but I think that that's true. I think that we don't want to hang on to the baton. We want to pass it on at some point. And it's it's not a good idea. I remember coming to New York that years ago, that there was one place who had the same senior warden for 35 years.
I'm holding up the sign of the cross.
He was a good man. He wasn't dictatorial or anything like that, but there was no effort to see who was going to come, and he was getting old and really probably couldn't do it for too much longer. And there wasn't that sense of preparing for the next one that I think we all have, as both as laity and as clergy. That's why we have term limits. And though clergy don't exactly have term limits, we sort of do. And if we're praying people, we kind of know when we get to the point where we've given what we can give and that they're really ready. The congregation is ready to move in another direction.
Well, in the university context, I once had a conversation with a wise chancellor, whom I will not name, who we were talking about, how long chancellorships should last, same sort of idea. And he said, Steve, I figure if I can't get it done in 10 years, it's probably not going to get done in the next 10. And that not that should be a particular time, but I think that's very, very important.
But I don't think there's a time limit. I've seen people who have been to the same parish as a clergy person for a lot of time and been fruitful and productive and enthusiastic the whole time.
No.
But I think that's not so common, because I think we do. I go with the 7-year model, because really, if you're going to do something in a parish, you've got to, the first 3 years is building trust, and then 3 to 5 is building a vision together, and then 5 to 7 is getting it done. And then you kind of renew and think, what's the next step? And it's not a hard line for 7 years, but I found it that's like Gail Sheehy wrote about passages of 7 years. It's that it really is valid. And 7, and then if you renew, you can go another 7 years. I've seen it, but I think it's rare for someone to be really called beyond that. But it's on it really depends on the parish and the clergy and the other leadership and the goals that you've set, and where you are in achieving those goals. So anyway, there it is.
Promised the group that we would, at some point, even as much as the two of us enjoy talking, that we would stop and open the floor for general questions. And maybe this is a good time to do that. Let's see, can you facilitate that, Samantha?
Absolutely. Looks like we do have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Can you talk a bit more about setting goals?
Oh my, okay. I'm probably not the right one to do that, but maybe I could both ask Bishop Roskam and maybe if I can, this is not mutual invitation, Bishop Diane, but maybe I could ask you to think a little bit about that from your standpoint, both as a bishop and formerly as a rector. What are the kinds of goals one could think about setting? That's a wonderful question.
I would, if Bishop Diane could start, because I think that the way goals are approached are affected by the system that's used. And if you could say a word about goals in the context of your mutual ministry reviews, because that's really where it happens.
And I think, thank you, both Kathy and Steve. It's really wonderful to be here and listen. From my perspective, everything has to start with understanding where God is calling you to, where is the Spirit calling you to go? And so from that, you develop your vision and mission statement. From that, you can start to look at goals in each of the ministry areas and actually assess each of the ministry areas that you have. I'm a big advocate of two things. Number one, narrative budgeting.
Yes.
And the other one is actually developing a zero-based budget every couple of years, because it forces you to take a hard look at are you going where you thought you were going to go? do you have the right goals in place, the right mechanisms in place, the right organization, even down to organizing your budget around where you think God is calling you to be, where God is calling you to go, where God is calling you to be. So all of this is, you can't do any of this in isolation. It really is about the relationship between all of those things and the people in your congregation. So, and the best vision and mission comes up from the congregation. It doesn't come down from the rector. This is, I'm sharing my own perspective.
Yeah.
And part of the mutual ministry review is just that. It's like being able to talk together as the leadership team of the congregation about, are you together doing what you thought God was calling you to do, where you thought God was calling you to be. So that's the short answer to that. Does that help?
Yeah.
That's very helpful, and I really want to underscore what you've said, and that because a lot of people, and rightly so, I suppose, because have a lot of anxiety about money. But for a church, that's not the starting point. I do something which I really had a struggle with in a lot of places because people get scared. It's a technique called lifting restrictions, where you get to dream about the best possible world, and it sort of frees up the mind to say what to get you together to your sense of mission. Now, yes, the current budget, it's not going to allow that, but what is there in that crazy, unrestricted visioning that really lies within the power of the church to do in a sensible way that doesn't go over budget? But you have to dream that dream first. It's never a good idea to start church work with the bottom line. We are not a people of the bottom line, and we can't start there. Do we take it into consideration? Absolutely. I never asked a parish to do something foolish with their money, but it can't be that anxiety about the bottom line can't be where we form our mission goals. It's got to be God's call, just as Bishop Diane said.
And
Yeah.
if I could just jump in real quick, and you can't be afraid to let a ministry that should be sunsetted be sunsetted. That has been a downfall of a lot of congregations. Just because you've always had a carnival every year doesn't mean you should be having a carnival this year, but doesn't mean you should ever have a carnival again. And so, but that takes deep discernment, and it takes the building of relationships in order to, let the people that have been in charge of this carnival for years, help them unpack that so that they feel like they've been honored and heard. But you can sunset that so the congregation can move on to where God is calling them to now. And as a teaser, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be offering a workshop at this hour on how to do zero-based budgeting and narrative budgeting. So just so you know, Sam can give you the information on that, but, and it'll, check the news, and please sign up. It's going to be fun. I make everything fun. Thank you so much.
You do.
So let me add a lay voice to that, really by way of underlining something that Bishop Diane just said. She said it's got to come up from the congregation. And this is me drinking again the Eric Law Kool-Aid. As part of our search process, the most recent search process, which I think ended wonderfully, Father Law facilitated a series of conversations with the congregation, the whole congregation, including the children's choir, for heaven's sakes, about goals and hopes and dreams. And this is about letting time pass. It took forever. If you were trying to, do bullet points, it would have driven you out of your mind. But out of it came a much deeper and richer sense of where congregational priorities lay. Now, I don't say we got it all right, or for heaven's sakes, but it took amazing amounts of time, but it was worth it in my view. So if you want that bubbling up to happen, you need to allow a lot of time. And then if you're going to eliminate as Bishop Bruce just said, if you're going to eliminate a former ministry, you have to have more time to have congregations with people for whom this has been a pride and joy, thinking about where they might go next, where they're, how much it's been appreciated, and so on. Again, time, and relationships. In this case, one relationship with the congregation as a whole, and another with the group that has been running, hypothetically, the carnival. Other questions?
If anyone has a question, please do put that in the chat. Now is the perfect time to ask. Just a comment regarding sunsetting a ministry. The pandemic has been helpful in getting us to sunset some ministries that will likely not be revisited. There was some discussion, but no recriminations, except to blame the pandemic.
This is in the category of silver linings.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful.
So I actually had a question. For anyone perhaps that's new to the role, who's just been elected to be a warden, what would you say is the very first thing that they should do?
Well, I think it's relationships. I think you need to start with the rector. You need to sit down with the rector and get to know each other a little bit. Figure out kind of what's your modus operandi. Some people like, agendas for that weekly meeting. Some people want to just kind of let it flow. So that would be where I would go. Both bishops, you've seen a lot of these relationships go right and wrong. You want to add anything to that?
I think trust is a very important part of the relationship. It's of any relationship, of course, but particularly with the warden, yeah. And that takes a while to build, but really maybe not so much time. If, of two people who are called to their ministries,
However reluctantly.
Yeah, even kicking and screaming, Steve. But it's building that trust that makes the relationship a success, and therefore the shared ministry the success.
Bishop Bruce, do you want to add anything to that?
Absolutely agree. And then in addition, I would always have people make sure that they read thoroughly and inwardly digested the catechism and handed them bylaws of the church so that they understood what the kind of laws within the congregation are. And then I encourage them to be familiar, or at least have a copy of the diocesan and the Episcopal Church's constitution and canons, just so that they had that the kind of the legal stuff behind them. But the first thing is we're rooted in faith in that, and the outline of that is in our catechism. So that's the structural part of that. But absolutely, it's all about relationships. It has to be about relationships. Jesus was about relationships. We've got to be about relationships.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am. Are there any other questions? Put those in the chat. Give that a moment. All right. Well, seeing nothing else, I think this is a good point to wrap up. Thank you so much, Steve and Bishop Catherine. This was a wonderful, valuable workshop. I think it would be a great idea for us to host a follow-up. So, stay tuned for that. We'll have more information on that. So just for my closing announcements, as a reminder, the recording of today's session is posted on the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel, and the resources will be available on the convention website. For our ministry fair, the next in our series will be on the topic of trauma-informed care with Stacy Roth, President and CEO of Hillsides, on Wednesday, February 3rd at 7 p.m. And then, as Bishop Diane was saying, we're also going to have another workshop Saturday, February 13th at 9 a.m. And that'll be Bishop Diane's workshop on narrative and zero-based budgeting. Also this afternoon at 4 p.m. is the annual Diocesan Martin Luther King Jr. Day observance. That will be featuring keynote speaker, the Reverend Dr. Gail Fisher-Stewart, priest in the Diocese of Washington and retired DC Metropolitan Police Captain. That will be live streamed on the Diocesan Facebook and YouTube channel. And that's it for my announcements. Thank you again, everybody. I will now turn it over to Bishop Diane to close us out with prayer.
And I just want to thank Steve and Kathy for taking time and putting together such a beautiful outline and talking about roles within the church that are so very important, especially now in these pandemic times. We've needed to have strong relationships in order to keep on going through all of this. So thank you both so very, very much. And I'm looking forward to your next offering. And trust me, I will be there.
We're holding you to it.
The Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
Gracious and Holy One, we give you thanks for this time. We give you thanks for all those who came to us live on Zoom, and all of us that have been on our live stream, and all who will see this in the future. Lord, continue to give us the heart and mind and will to follow you, to invite others to follow you in the way we live our lives, in the way we live out our faith, in the way we live out our congregational life and church. All this we ask and give thanks in the name of Jesus, your Son. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I look forward to seeing you at our next workshop.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Steve.